When you look back on the last 12 months of this pandemic era, we were together in India. We made a video together talking about this thing that was announced by the WHO, and we were sharing a simple yogic practice so that people could remain stable and sane during something we could not have anticipated how it would unfold. So during this year of living in this pandemic era, what is it that you look back on and cherish the most in terms of experiences or insights?
If I had, it was like a very strong inner feeling that I should leave my job and go to India and stay there. And that I cherish the most. That decision in complete uncertainty to go and stay in India, the ashram at Isha Yoga Centre. And I think that was the most powerful thing that I could have done for my growth at that point in time. Definitely a lot of experiences happened during that period of time. Who knows, if I stayed, I may have worked remotely. I may have been asked to leave, right? We don't know what the situation would have been. But somehow, somewhere, there was no logic behind it. There was no intelligent thought. There was no planning. It was just, at this point in time, where I am right now, this is what I need to do. And I didn't hesitate. I did have second thoughts, right? Like third thoughts, fourth thoughts, but my intention didn't hesitate. And I really cherish that. It's not 12 months, it was like over 14 months.
This was even pre-pandemic, actually, but I see what you're saying. It was that period of clarity that allowed you to detach yourself, remove yourself from Canada, from your job, from your career path, to actually go to an ashram in southern India. That period of clarity has allowed you to experience everything since then, and that's why you cherish that period of time.
Yeah, and I think that's the most important thing. Because if I look at the situation right now, I see it's heading in a particular direction, but you never know what factors will change. I was watching a video recently. This guy was saying he went from making $80,000 a year to making $0 overnight, simply because he quit his job and he was going to, do this Amazon FBA thing. Because he just didn't want to proceed in that direction. And he found he was only getting a 5%, 2, 3, 5% raise every year, no matter how much he worked his butt off. And I was like, okay, interesting. I just saw this recently. But when I heard him say this, it just helped me see in a different perspective that, you know what? There's no such thing as a right decision or a wrong decision. In any given situation, anything can change at any point in time. So there's no point fretting about, what's going to happen. No, if there is something that I want to do, I should just go ahead and do it. And I'm glad I made that decision. I cherish that, I don't know what you can call it, maybe that clarity, as you mentioned, to step back, look, understand, reconsider, and step into the path that I want to take forward, whatever that may be. Obviously that's also subject to change. But the only thing that's true is what's my top priority? My top priority is growth. So, yeah. And tell me, you answered this question as well, the last 12 months. What is it? What do you cherish the most through this whole pandemic time?
Yeah, so first of all, I resonate with what you said very, very deeply. My whole journey of hitting the pause button on a certain career trajectory happened way more, greater than 12 months ago. It was like summer of 2019. But it is that giving myself the space to reassess, reprioritize, and just simply ask, okay, in a situation where I feel really fulfilled, but I see that there's so much more growth, what could be the next best step that I can take? What could be the next direction that I set for my life? And it was that decision in the summer of 2019, even though it took me another 6 months to get to India, it was that decision that has brought me to this moment. And all of the experiences, insights, experiential explosions that have happened on the spiritual path since then are because of that period of time. But specifically during the pandemic, there were just so many moments of feeling deeply grateful for having taken a step that was not going to garner social support, definitely not family and parental support, but it put me in the most safe and sane and supportive place I could have been on the planet during what has been, an unimaginably difficult period of time for the planet. And there were so many moments of just feeling grateful for having made that decision. Obviously, we couldn't have predicted, it would benefit us in this way. This is the reward of our decisions. So there was a lot of that from, I guess, March through July of being at Isha Yoga Centre. But I think what I cherish most is when I came back to the US, I felt so much balance and ease in navigating what the next step was going to be. And I just felt very clear with myself, I'm not going to rush into the next thing. I'm not going to take a job immediately. I'm not going to start applying to graduate schools, or I'm not even going to listen to anyone's suggestions. I'm simply going to be here with my parents and brother in Denver, Colorado, taking it a day at a time, knowing that as I settle, things will become clear. And that's a new version of myself, because the Trent who went to Isha Yoga Centre in India was one who was kind of just disconnecting myself from this very ambitious, planning-oriented human being who always needed a strategy, always needed to know what the next step was. And the Trent coming out of the ashram was that. It was, I will allow life's plan for me to unfold. And it was amazing to just see how many things revealed themselves to me, how many opportunities surfaced with very little effort on my own end, just catching up with friends, talking to mentors, talking to past colleagues. And so in so many of those situations, there were proposals to join a team, create a new venture, do like a side hustle or a remote temporary gig. And I just got to look at them with a certain amount of composure and see, is this what I want? Like, I can do anything I want. I'm fortunate to not have any immediate compulsions, financial responsibilities, life partner who, needs to be on board with things. Let me not rush this. This is a very rare, status that I'm in, coming back from, an Indian ashram and being back with my parents and brother, not having to worry about rent. What is it that I really want to do? What is going to bring me fulfillment? Where does my next growth journey lie? What kind of people do I want to be around? I had all of these questions that were frankly, simmering and floating around even months prior when I knew it was going to be time to return to the US. And there was just so much joy in that wayfinding experience back in the US in July and August of 2020. So what I cherish the most is that openness that I allowed myself to experience. And that ultimately brought me to the Tennessee Center, where I am right now, because I realized very, very clearly that while part of me wanted to have a very clean series of stages, okay, I had my 7-month monastic experience, now I'm going to have a 2-year entrepreneur experience, and then after that, we'll see what happens. Even though there was part of me that wanted that definition, there was a much deeper part that saw that there is more growth. There is something truly special about being in a micro community like the yoga center here, where individual growth and transformation is a top priority, but so is attending to the greater needs of people around you and impacting the life around you in a way that is deeply worthwhile because you've tasted that impact firsthand. So during this pandemic period of time, I will always, look back and cherish the openness I had and the letting go that took place of a conventional, socially validated game plan for life.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Especially as you had taken that step back and you were just observing everything with that balance. the social plans, the socially accepted plans didn't really make much sense to you. And then there's always like, but then I always wonder about this. What do you think in terms of planning versus spontaneity? How do you balance that in seeking the best opportunities and taking things forward so that you can reach the best possible outcomes? Because there's always going to be that balance between strategy and using methodology in order to maximize the outcome of things that you're working on, but at the same time being open to spontaneity. Because if you want to create something that's truly worthwhile, not just for you within your life, but for a lot of people, it feels to me like both have to not only balance each other hand in hand, but maybe even integrate in a sort of a way. And I think that requires a very deep insight from out of the individuals that are leading an effort, because you can't be both in one way. You can't be just one way. You can't be another way. But you have to be able to integrate both in a very practical fashion, so that you can create the best possible outcome.
I feel like your question also contains the answer, Abhishek. I think the key is insight and also curiosity. If you are someone who's deeply curious about your inner nature, but also the world around you, how it's changing, what is most needed in your immediate environment, and maybe even in the greater circumstances around you, you will naturally pay attention and perceive the problems, the challenges, the opportunities. And with that curiosity, you may simultaneously have a certain insight about what role you can play, what skills you have, where your passion lies, where you want to, channel your focus and energy to being part of the solution. So how to balance a strategy for life with also spontaneity in life, I think it can very easily fall into place if someone is relentlessly curious about themselves, always wanting to learn more about what this human mechanism is, and combining that with a capacity for insight, which again, I don't think is a straightforward thing, but definitely I've felt through spiritual practices, through a daily meditation practice, that I'm able to be less involved with mental chatter and more perceptive of simply what is there in front of me, simply what reality is. And I think just through perceiving the people, the situations around you, insights can simply come. And through that combination of curiosity and insight, you'll naturally start thinking of solutions and thinking about where you want to channel your time and energy, as well as always giving yourself the option to be spontaneous and to change your plan and adapt and evolve your plan as you see fit. Spontaneity and strategy. How does one remain spontaneous and adaptive in their life, but also have a clear enough strategic vision so that they can end up making whatever impact or success they wish to have?
Based on how your perspective is, it helped me look at it in this one very important aspect of assuming and questioning. So if not you, but for me, I found at some point, actually it came out of this entrepreneurial journey where, we assume that this is something that people want. We assume this is a very good product. But then the most important quality of a product manager or of an entrepreneur is build something people want, right? So then you start to question that fundamental assumption that you have, which is you think you know what people want, you think it's going to sell, but no, that's not how it works. So it's simply what I noticed for me as I got into that journey, this one thing just trickled over into other aspects of my life. And becoming a questioner, an inquirer, if that's a word, or inquisitive, and a seeker, right? It sounds like that's what you were speaking about when you shared that, if you're curious, very curious, constantly curious about yourself about the world around you. And if we assume that we know, we won't really be as curious as we could be. Because thinking we know or assuming we know just kind of kills curiosity, and that's what I feel education has done to us. Because it's all in the textbook. I just have to take what's there,
Yep.
recognize that these are the data and algorithms that other people want me to assume function in the world, and operate according to that.
Yep.
Answer the examinations according to that, and that's it.
Passive consumption of information and then just regurgitating it. And sadly, that carries over well beyond education. Once people enter the workforce, they're not really thinking about people's needs, or as you were saying, being inquisitive about what people want. It's more of the build something and they'll come, hopefully, fingers crossed.
Yeah, and I feel it's, what I'm looking at is not just in one category of doing things. When I say category, what am I referring to? Like, one category could be career, one category could be emotions, one category could be relationships. Like this, there are other categories that we have in our lives, but if we just take a step back from everything and we just see that everything is all connected from our dogma, and if we just change one thing at that fundamental level, first principles thinking, if we dig all the way down to the first principles, if we can get to that, which is actually very difficult to get to that in our own inquiry, in our self-inquiry. I feel, for me, it's been pretty, I've been tricked into thinking, yeah, this is it, but it's the mind's games. But once we get to that and we start noticing that subtle changes, particularly with these meditation practices and everything that we're doing, I feel subtle changes happen. But just when I say subtle, it's something on that fundamental level, a small change. But it snowballs into something huge in our experience in one of these categories.
Can you give an example? How has first principles thinking snowballed into something deeply cherished or valuable for you?
Yeah, let me clarify. It's more about not just first principle thinking, but changes at such a fundamental level that may have happened subtly without me consciously making that effort. But I'm involved in a process, right? These meditation practices and the yoga, whatever we're doing, it recreates me in a certain way. So there are many examples I can think of. I'm just trying to think of something that's relatable. to
Not too esoteric.
Yeah, and it could be, let's say, think about success or for relationships. Maybe I think this is the easiest way that other people will also relate. If you guys do relate, I'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to me, which is that when it comes to something that I wanted to do in my life, I started to see that I picked it up from the situations that I was in, from the people that I was surrounded by any other form of consumption. It doesn't just have to be people and situations. It could also be reading some text, reading news, or whatever, right? However, I'm consuming things. So I had whatever my own definition of success was. At some point, for me, I picked up that my self-worth was directly tied to what my net worth would be. And then I didn't realize where this came from, but after going to Sadhana Pada and after spending those 14 months coming back, I started to see many things unfolding, and a lot of insecurities became clear, and the dissolution of those insecurities became clear. And this was one such thing, one such phenomena where I was no longer insecure about this thing where I had to make a lot of money, because if I didn't make a lot of money, if I didn't earn billions of dollars or whatever, I would think I didn't do anything with my life. Because in my family, they come from this place where they want to do a lot of work and they want to, just do business. I come from this kind of a background. And not just that, I had picked up because I was interested in technology from a young age, doing things to like iPhones and stuff, playing around with the operating system and like reorganizing how the display, all this tech stuff. from a young age. So then that connected with this kind of a compulsion that I picked up from the people around me, and I noticed my parents have certain things like this that they're working towards, my dad is working towards, and for some reason, somewhere along the way, and I know how and when this happened, I picked it up and made it my own. Step by step, not all at once, but step by step. And other people also that I would have been surrounded by, I picked things up. Other content I was consuming online as well, I picked these things up. This all came from an experience of inadequacy, right? So this whole process, I've been dissolving that unconsciously. So it's been happening at such a fundamental level. You know, when I talk about first principles, this is what I mean. But on this, in this category, it looks like a small thing, but this small thing can can drive my life into a totally different direction.
Absolutely.
Or rather, it can become the only thing in my life. I can be totally consumed by it. And not can be, I was. I can't say I can be, because it was true for me, but now it's no longer true. So just like you came back, you became so open to many opportunities, many possibilities. And now it's the same thing for me. I'm open to many possibilities. And so many different things are coming into my mind as I just look around. I'm like, what's this guy's name? I cannot remember his name, but he's doing some coaching thing and for free. So I was like, okay, I just signed up. And he's like this super successful coach guy, freedom coach, whatever. And I was like, let me just try this out. But I've noticed that I've done some things and it's supported people along the way in some way. So if somebody comes and I am able to help them, then why not? Because this kind of a thing was in my mind, and now there's something, so I just, jumped on it. I would have never worked with my dad on his business, but now I'm like, at least let me learn it. Now that I have some time, okay, I'll go sit with my dad, I'll learn about his business, the process and stuff, and also sit with him for some time, go to meetings, whatever he's doing, so that at least I'm aware of, what's happening. We're doing some things with content as well. For example, this podcast.
Here we are.
Yes. So just like this, these other things that I may not have necessarily, I would have looked at it on my own little matrix based on what my important criterias are, and been like, no, this is not going to become a scalable, multi-billion-dollar business. I'm not even going to look in that direction. So everyone talks about, okay, you pick and choose, you put on your blinders, and you just run like a horse.
Yep. Unwavering focus on one thing, nothing else matters.
Exactly. But what if your decision came from a place of insecurity, from a place of exclusiveness?
Yep.
This is what somehow had happened to me. A place of inadequacy. This is what had happened to me. So this just subtle changes on that fundamental level, on first principles, maybe we can call it that, if we can call it that, have manifested in different categories. This is just one thing I hope people can relate to. I can go on in different kinds of examples, but
So
yeah.
What I'm hearing you say is, by becoming aware on a fundamental and also very subtle level that your interests, your trajectory, your plans were in part, or even in a major way, informed by other people, other people's wishes for you, what other people viewed as success, because that's what was driving you to an extent, and that took on a major form of inadequacy. You became aware of that, which allowed you to decide, okay, do I want to be a slave to this inadequacy and craft my life plan based on this fundamental feeling, or do I want to have some distance from it and be available to other possibilities?
And this came from the distance. All that time we spent, we created a huge distance between us and between our old lives, not just between the people, but also between us and the situations. And we were doing something totally different, albeit we may be using the same skills, but it was giving us that opportunity, that space to look at ourselves. And obviously with the processes, there were some fundamental changes happening. And what I realized after coming back is I started to see a lot more after I came back,
Yes.
as opposed to when I was there, because this gave me the opportunity to step back into situations that I had been in before and look at it after these kinds of changes have happened. And they continue to happen as we continue with the process. And that's when I start to see how it all manifests on this surface level. We could call it that, and that's when I know, okay, this was all stupid. Because back there, I still had some thoughts, and I wasn't sure. I need to explore in different ways. I need to explore outside as well, and go back to these situations and see how I respond.
It's so incredible to reflect on us both having spent this time, in a spiritually oriented space, and between the environment that we were in as well as the practices we're doing, there's kind of this ongoing cleansing process that's happening where you're less and less identified with certain thoughts, preconceived notions, ambitions, value systems, what is right for your life, what is wrong for your life, what does my dad want for me, what does society think is right. And because that distance is created when you come back to the rest of the world, you're able to reconnect with similar people, similar situations, but have a completely different perspective on it. And it's a perspective that's much less compulsive. It's behavior also that's much less compulsive. And it gives you that freedom to decide, okay, do I want to chart down the same path? If it makes sense to me now, if it fits with my strategy and my spontaneity and my insight that I have, great. If not, I'm less beholden to certain tendencies, inadequacies, judgments, beliefs that I had, and I'm simply more able to respond to the reality I'm in, not the past, not the future, just simply where I am right now. And experientially, it can be hard to express to someone else, but when you look at how your life plays out because of those subtle fundamental changes, it's very, very obvious to you and anyone around you who knows you for a certain period of time, because they'll see that you're making certain choices, taking certain risks, making progress in ways they hadn't imagined possible for you. So I love how these subtle fundamental changes can bring about such significant and noticeable effects on a macro scale.
Exactly, and what you're telling to me, and based on my observation as well in my life, I think this is a common thread, which I want to bring up, is people don't always notice how you are. Because not everyone is as perceptive. They're not looking at that, but they may after some time, but initially they'll notice the actions.
Yes.
So when you said your choices, your risks that you take, they'll notice that.
Yes.
Because if I come all of a sudden, after all this time from India, after Isha Yoga Centre, and I start doing coaching, for example, I don't know if I will, I'm just going through this person's process.
Right.
It is not something I would have ever done.
Right.
It is definitely not. But they might see that and they'd be like, what the hell? This guy, what's going on? Or maybe some of them might have thought that I was going to do it. But it's basically what you're saying, which is that they may not see how we are. They may not see who we have become until they see our action. Whatever it is, like some people might take subtle action. Some people might take an action on a macro scale for them to see, like, hey, something's different. It all depends on how aware that individual is, how far deeply they want to look,
and how open they are with themselves to be spontaneous. I've noticed in the 8 months of being back now that the people who are the most excited to catch up with me and see what I'm up to are the ones who have given themselves permission to be authentic in their life path, and the people who are the most kind of rigid and even condescending in responding to what I'm doing are those who have been, rigid and maybe even self-deprecating in their path. This is what I need to do. This is all I'm worthy of. This is what society values. So this is my path. I remember very distinctly speaking with a mentor a few months ago, and he said, Trent, you're doing it, man. Like of everyone I've talked to and coached, you're one of the very few who's actually charted an authentic path and is fulfilled and also impacting people around him in a way that he thinks is worthwhile. And I may not get what you're doing, and I may not be doing, the same spiritual or meditative practices that you're doing, but I see that you are, actualized, and that you are invested in something you care about, and that is amazing. Which is very different from, speaking to family members or even friends who, as you said, they may not actually pay attention on a granular enough level to notice changes, and to them it's just, oh well, you seem to have gotten really accustomed and comfortable to a certain lifestyle, which I think is escapist, which I think is lazy, which I think is disconnected from reality. And I hope at some point you decide to descend from your mountain retreat and join the rest of us. And honestly, I react to both with extreme gratitude, because I learn a lot about those people, and it gives me the chance to reflect on many things, on my decisions, on how people are at this current point in the trajectory of humanity. And neither one really affects me on an emotional level. It's, on one hand, it doesn't boost my ego. On another hand, it doesn't crush me or sadden me. It's just, it's fascinating to see how people respond to a path that is authentic, but in this social situation seen as unconventional or not economically productive.
When we look at economic productivity and making an impact, what do you feel? Do you feel that when we look at making an impact, is it generally viewed in relation to economic productivity?
Definitely needs to be measurable. For most people to say Abhishek has made an impact, they need to be able to measure it, whether it's in dollars, whether it's in meals served to the hungry, whether it's number of products disseminated or number of followers that you've gleaned. There's always a desire for people to quantify and measure the impact you've made. And if it's not quantifiable, if it's something subjective, if it's something internal, then it's dubious whether an impact is being made upon yourself and upon others.
I get that, and I don't think that's entirely true, because it's not that it's not measurable. It's not measurable with that individual's level of perception. What I mean to say is, when we talked about changes at that deep, fundamental level, first principles, if we want to call it that, manifesting in terms of action. And you mentioned in these conversations, you get to see where people are, where humanity in general is in the journey. Overall, we are not in a place where we can look at that individual level of transformation. We simply look at it, whatever we're measuring in terms of these kinds of things that you mentioned. In fact, all those things that you mentioned that came out of the top of your head is because that's what you feel relate to the people that are viewing this. That's what you feel is what's working. Even you look at the level of the United Nations, right? You look at the 17 SDGs, Sustainability Development Goals. You see what their targets are. You see what their indicators are. It's all at this certain kind of a surface level. Because you look at the top line, you look at the bottom line. We need to pull people all the way up. But everybody's focused only on the bottom line, not on the top line. Because we don't know where the top line is. For humanity, there's no top line. And that's not something that's measurable with our instruments. It's not something that you can measure with a meter. You cannot measure how realized a being is with the meter. And you cannot measure that for each person. Okay, this is 0. This is 100 in terms of how free you are as a human. And this is where each individual is that came in, and this is where they left. And this is the level of freedom that they got to from 0 to 100, or wherever their starting line was. It doesn't have to be at 0. And once they got to it, And this is how they got to it, and so this is whose help they received, and this is how much that person helped. There's no qualitative quantitative analysis of these aspects, and there never will be with our instruments. Like, how can you just cannot do that? As you mentioned, it's subjective. Our instruments are for objective measurement, and we're both on our unique journeys. It is not so, but that doesn't mean that there's no impact. You see what I'm saying, right?
Absolutely. I could not agree more.
This impact is measurable impact. What does that mean? Measurable impact simply means that you are only measuring the criteria that can be measured with our instruments.
Yep.
Which means a whole lot of life is lost because you cannot measure life. How can you measure life?
It's almost like there's a cost of measuring. Of course, there's a benefit because you can offer a quantity about something, but at the same time, you're missing a lot, especially when it comes to a human being. If you're measuring a human being in terms of their education level, in terms of their wealth, in terms of some formula for their economic contributions around them, you're missing so much. You're doing them such a disservice because a human being is a process, and a human being has the potential and possibility of evolving to a boundless state, which inherently it cannot be measured. And something that I'm grateful to have encountered within the yogic sciences is this notion of evolution and the different avatars that I guess sages perceived and described and propounded. The final state is what's called the mystical man. Not the not the corporate man, not the factory assembly man, the mystical man. What does that look like? Is the mystical man wearing a suit? Is the mystical man in a call center? The reason I bring this up is because when you think about the possibility of a human being and what it means for an inner evolution to take place, it cannot be quantified. And I think because of that, many of us stray away from it and perhaps neglect that possibility because it's harder to measure and therefore it's harder to justify in current situations that we find ourselves in.
You're talking about justification, and I think that's a very important thing. When you look at it, we have been trained to look at things in a certain way. Can we measure this? Can we justify this? Is worth doing? Why don't we ever? This has been my journey to what is worthwhile. From, okay, we want to make this happen. Is it worth doing? Is this activity worth doing? From moving from that to, is this worthwhile for me as a being to pursue with my life? I've been billions and tens of billions of years since this universe has come into existence. I'm here now, 25 years old, maybe at 100. So let's say I have a 100-year lifespan, and after I pass, again, for like eternity, I'm not there. Is it worthwhile? Like this question, not even asking, is this worthwhile doing for me? Simply following that path, but where are you getting? We're anyways going to death. Like Sadhguru says, you're just walking to your grave. You're not walking anywhere else. So this so-called career path is not going to get you anywhere. It's not going to get you to that next stage as a piece of life. This is actually, we've been trained not to look at, as a being, how can I evolve? But we're trained to look at, okay, I don't even know how to put this into words because nobody has consciously looked at it and chosen to go in this direction. But it's something like, you give your input. You know what I'm referring to, right? In terms of like the social context, economic context, as opposed to the life context.
Absolutely.
How would you put that into words? What is?
There's like a certain social script and social programming that we absorb just de facto by existing right now, and it's all about what have I accumulated in terms of knowledge, in terms of money, in terms of accolades, in terms of credibility. And how can I continue that accumulation until a point where I feel fulfilled? And of course, you'll say what that point is, you'll reach it, you're still not fulfilled. You'll set a new point, you'll reach it, still not fulfilled. It's a very hopeless process that is pursuing one's fulfillment in installments that are limited, as opposed to pausing and inquiring, like, what is the nature of this life? And realizing I have no idea. I'm completely ignorant of what it actually means to be a human being. And allowing oneself to be suspended in that curiosity to maybe seek and experience what that reality is, because perhaps it can't be articulated in a rational way. Those are kind of the two competing worlds, one of tangible but limited accomplishments and accumulations versus one where you are throwing yourself into a subjective inward journey which has boundless consequences if pursued with the right commitment and intensity.
It's a very important thing that you just brought up. Constantly accumulating across many different factors, whether it's knowledge, whether it's love, so-called love, or wealth. These are the three things that people are generally trying to accumulate. And you're saying that's one aspect, and the other aspect is that curiosity, that just letting everything go and just exploring.
And admission of ignorance that I actually have no idea.
Exactly. That's like the most important thing that we see, like, I don't know,
yeah.
Right? So I just want to, for our audience here, this does not mean that in the former you will accumulate a lot, you'll be wealthy either as a scholar or in business or in politics or in, I don't know, what relates to like
relationships and
love.
social connectedness and romance.
Yeah, I just thought of celebrities, but
fame.
You're
okay.
not, whatever. But you could still have that. You could still be Kim K, and the latter could still be in your experience.
Yes.
This is what I want to say this, because if we stop it with that point, the main point doesn't get across, which is, you mentioned these are competing worlds. These are competing worlds if we don't have the right perspective.
Absolutely.
The game is not about action. The game is not about what you are doing. The game is about, what is your perspective? How are you coming at it? For example, right now we are, even at Isha Yoga Centre, we were doing so many things. It's not like we were living in a mountain. We were working on the computer. We were literally almost like, it's like we were working in an office.
Interviews, grant applications, team calls, leadership retreats.
Yeah, what was I doing? Like, leading marketing promotional activities, like organizing all this stuff. And it's not an escape either. It is not escape from the former world into the latter either. So essentially what I'm saying is the game of perspective. Once the latter becomes something that you are constantly immersed in, then the former, whatever form of success is, will naturally happen to you once you get involved, because only when you see you don't know can you be totally alert.
Yes.
And then awareness can seep into us, because if we don't care and we just assume like, yeah, this is it, then we're not open to possibilities. And even if success does come, then it's social and without inner fulfillment. The first step is inner fulfillment. The
Yes.
first step is inner joy. And then whatever success comes can happen, because then it's not about me.
Mm-hmm.
It's about an inclusive vision for everyone involved.
I'm really glad you're bringing up this point, because it's easy to just listen to a snippet of this conversation and think, oh, Abhishek and Tran are dissing, the hustle, the career, the game, and they're saying that to live a material existence is inferior and not worthwhile. That's actually not the case. If the right perspective is there, and if you've invested in being in a certain way, in a way that is stable and composed and not looking for fulfillment outside of you, then the action you take will be an expression of fulfillment that you've already cultivated, which is such a beautiful way to exist. Life becomes a dance, because you're not hoping that this paycheck, this relationship, this promotion, this fame will be the fulfillment. What you're doing in terms of action on the limited material plane is an expression of something you've cultivated on the inner plane. And in that sense, as you pointed out, they are not in conflict. we perceive them as in conflict. I remember asking, a question many years ago: how do I find balance between the spiritual path and my path as a future doctor, which was the plan several years ago. And now when I look back at that, the question, actually, the premise of the question is based on one of not realizing there's no conflict. Okay, maybe in terms of time allocation as a medical student or as a physician, there's only so many hours I can do a specific cross-legged meditation, but actually cultivating an equanimous, joyful inner state helps you so much in accomplishing whatever it is you want to accomplish in the rest of the world.
Actually, when you bring that up, the premise that I would like to think about is, how do you look at things? Are you the type of person that wants to go into the Olympics and just hope that you win without doing the right kind of training? Or are you going to go prepare yourself and win the battle before you even fight the battle? So that's just, I don't know if that makes much sense, but I'm trying to make this analogy where you can always go to any competition and not prepare yourself fully, but somehow get by. But if you really want to take the top place in that competition, you prepare in such a way that you have won the competition before you even step foot into that field. Now, when it comes to, let's look at that in a greater perspective, in the field of life, right? I'm definitely not qualified for this, but the number one thing that I think, at least for me, which was important and why I went to Isha, was because of this, which is, even though other things somehow they're happening, internally, I didn't have that sense of joy or that sense of fulfillment, which was happening by itself. And so I realized, before I try to set the world in order around me, it's important that I set the world in order that is within me first. So it is not that these are in conflict, just as you're saying. It is rather that if you don't set yourself in order, and whatever you try to do is going to come out of that disordered mess.
Yes.
I'm still working on ordering myself, but I'm in a far better place than I was. And I learned this from a monk, because she told me, she's saying, I don't remember exactly how it came up, but it was like, I was saying, I don't want to put a mess onto anyone else. And she just stopped. She looked at me very intensely, just for like a half a second pause. She made a half second pause, and she looked at me intensely and said, "Do you really think you're capable of that?" And then I looked at her, and I was like, "No." But then I realized, wait, it's not a negative thing. This is actually a very positive thing, because I noticed in the people around me that a little bit of frustration, a little bit of irritation, all of a sudden snowballs into this big ball of anger that they just come and they just smash you with it. I'm no longer capable of doing that, which makes me a human being that is not creating trouble on the planet. Mm-hmm. Because it's not just about yelling at someone or getting angry at someone because of a small thing, but any action I would do out of any emotion, rather than out of consciousness, out of awareness, is going to have an impact that I may not want to have. If I do out of love, that's one thing. But to do something out of this kind of a negative emotion, whatever it is, even the smallest little thing, could have a negative impact in someone else's life because it's touching someone, whatever action I'm doing. Just doing something because I'm aware that this is what I need to do, as opposed to doing something out of that emotion. I think that's very important. But if I don't set myself in that right order, like in inner orderliness, then I'm just creating a mess for others. If I'm a mess, I'm creating a mess. But if I'm not a mess, then I'm not going to create a mess. I'm going to fix the mess. Fix myself before I fix the world.
I think it's spot on. I think anyone listening to this should take away that it's not choosing between a spiritual path and a material path. It's realizing that the sequence, how you prioritize the inner versus the outer, really matters. And when you prioritize inner growth and balance and clarity, you set yourself up to be much more likely to succeed in the world around you. And as you just pointed out, much less likely to cause damage and harm. I think people who are incidentally successful end up accumulating a lot of power and capacity to do something, but sometimes it can actually be something quite tragic and destructive around them. And I think that the determining factor, the variable in those situations is, have they reached a point within themselves where they're internally ordered, as you said?
Just to clarify for the audience, prioritizing the inner as opposed to the outer does not mean you leave your home, you leave your job, and you go somewhere for some time and some retreat. That's not what it means. What it means is, in your day-to-day, moment to moment if possible, you are prioritizing the way that you are before prioritizing what you do, so that how you do something, whatever you're doing, how you do it, happens well. And so that what you choose to do can be out of a place where you are trying to create well-being for everyone around you. At least this is what it is for me. Yeah, I wanted to clarify this point. What you're saying is like pretty spot on. And one thing I noticed is there's a lot of resources on this planet. There's a lot of wealth. The issue is we don't have people with the right perception and the right priorities to use those resources to create well-being for everyone so that it's appropriately distributed and so that there's a level of minimum well-being for everyone, such that there is no such thing as poverty. We should not have poverty in today's world, actually. And it's not saying it's one person's fault or 10 people's fault or 100 people's fault or 1,000 people's fault. I'm saying it's nobody's fault. We just have to see this is the situation. We have to understand the whole context, who's operating, and we can see, okay, this is what we need to do, and then we can take action. But that will not happen if every single one of us is graduating and thinking, okay, this is the job I need to do, then this is what I need to do, then this is what I need to do, so that I'm okay. We need to instead look at it, okay, what are my needs? What resources do I need? Once that's settled, or rather, once I know what that is, let me see how I can quickly settle that so that I can give my time, give my energy to something that is more beneficial, something that is beneficial to as many people as possible. Not just people, but to as much life as possible. Because otherwise you will live your life as just a social creature or an economic cog, or as opposed to that human possibility that that I've heard about. Actually, I haven't heard about the human possibility, but because you can't hear about it, because it's this unlimited possibility, and that's the most exciting thing, actually. But we're not exploring it on a macro, individual macro scale. We're not exploring it, or rather, individuals are not exploring it.
Individuals at scale.
Individuals are not exploring it,
billions.
and in the billions are not exploring it in this way. Especially, dude, we are in the 0.01% of the world in terms of resources. We're in North America, Canada, U.S. Oh my God, Mexico's there too, but you know what I mean. Yep. I'm in Canada, you're in U.S. So, but we have this kind of access. There are many people like us. Some of the great. When I look at it, I see some of the sharpest minds that I've noticed. They are not making full use of what they can do to create well-being for people around, just because they don't have that, maybe inclusiveness is the word, I don't know. But I remember this thing Swami Vivekananda would talk about, which is head, heart, and hands. But your heart is the most important. With your hands, by hands, he doesn't mean physically hands, but he means capability to do action. By head, he means the sharpness of your intellect, how you can use your head, your intelligence to do good things. But he means the heart. He's saying no matter how much capability you have, no matter how much intelligence you have, if you don't have that heart, if you haven't really worked on your heart, then my friend, you won't be able to touch as many, or you won't even prioritize touching very many lives.
Yes. We unfortunately are in a place right now where people devalue the heart. They see it as a vulnerability and weakness, where in fact it's the component, it's the core attribute that has to be cultivated, because from a point of empathy, from a point of inclusiveness, one can make an impact that is good for everyone. And if that's ignored, again, you might incidentally or accidentally be successful, but with that success and power, you could actually cause a lot of destruction.
When you talked about empathy, I would say this requires a lot of inner strength. And the reason I want to share this is because I just saw a post on LinkedIn today. It was something, I think it was Gary Vee's post. He talked about, he wrote 11 or 12 qualities, and one of them was empathy. And then somebody commented, and she said, basically she was being empathetic. Don't remember the situation, but she's working at some big company. And then somebody, maybe her immediate supervisor, was against that empathy and was like, what are you doing and stuff. And even World Economic Forum, I don't know if it was 2020 or something, or 2014, but they're saying the next decade, whatever period of time, one of the top 10 skills or top 20 skills was empathy.
Yep.
Or being able to relate to people, these kinds of things. What I'm seeing is, on some level, people are seeing that this is very important, but in order to actually implement it on the ground level across organizations, across every organization, is difficult to do, maybe because not everybody has that inner strength. I think it requires, if you look at it, it requires a certain level of inner strength to be empathetic, as opposed to only going by what you feel and just, throwing that on others and just be like, oh, whatever. Because you can always cause harm, right?
Definitely agree.
It's easy to cause harm. It's difficult to look at it and see how can I turn that muck into something beautiful.
Without a doubt. I think any organization that cares about their most valuable resource, which is human beings, which it's an insult to even call them a resource.
Yep.
They know that empathy is crucial, and that without it, they're doing the entire organization and its mission a disservice. But on an individual level, you can try to implement empathy in the workplace and immediately see that people aren't on board with it and get discouraged. But if you have the inner strength to know that it's worthwhile, to know that the element of the heart is essential, then you'll do it anyways. And of course, that could become infectious. So what I'm reflecting on this past hour, Abhishek, is just how, as we jump from idea, topic to topic, something we're doing is also dispelling the polarities. It's not, should I be spontaneous or strategic? It's not, should I focus on the inner world or the outer world? It's not, should I be selfish or care about the society around me? In fact, it's about cultivating a certain perspective and deciding where you want to start, what you want to prioritize. But all of these things are connected. And in my experience, you're not really sacrificing one for another. By addressing oneself, one's interiority, you equip yourself to deal with the world around you. By being open and spontaneous, you allow yourself to perceive things that can actually help you create a long-term strategy. I think it's great how we've gone across these topics and looked at, I think, commonly held questions. Maybe they're asked in different ways for different people, but is it this or that? Do I care about this and neglect this? Is this what's true and this is what's false? I think one thing that we've been able to explore together is that it never has to be that simple, and typically the answer is much more subtle and much harder to express in words.
We're moving from trying to balance between A and B to integrating the right amounts or the right volumes of A and B. That concoction that works for each individual is different. There's no such thing as how much do I need to balance this with that. It is rather the question of how do I need to integrate things? How do I need to integrate the situation for now? And it's going to continue to change.
Yes.
Humans are beings. We're human possibilities. We're not some box that just remains the same. And that's what makes it beautiful, right? That's why we're able to think so much. That's why we're able to emote so much. That's why we're able to create the things that we've done.
Yes.
This is why we're able to make the world in such a beautiful way. And it's up to us to take that forward. We are the future of humanity.